honest too. Everything that's found is new, and someone else's ticket saved for a time that you know. Did you see what happened here? You're like the diamonds in a room. They were sleeping when you found them, made a castle of things that were new. And when you're free, take a walk around the building that you drew, and steal the person from a story that you think no one's heard of. What happened here? How did you feel? Don't think you knew how much you were, just 'cause heads on perfect circles and they slept while you woke. Wouldn't you like what happened here? As if you lost something you love. Look at pictures of the moonlight, try to pick out a favorite. Did you know, like all the rest, we keep our memories in a safe, and all the insides full of writing, like a ticket you saved.
So in January of this year, I went to Singapore to a friend's wedding, and I think a great way to understand and see a culture is through celebration, through weddings or through funerals, and how people bury their dead. But this was a joyous visit, and it was great to be there for 6 days. Oh my goodness, it was unbelievably hot. Being from South Carolina, I thought nothing could beat South Carolina on its hottest day, but Singapore did. Temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit with extreme humidity. I was taking showers 2 to 3 times a day, but nonetheless, it was just a wonderful experience. The layout of the city is very unique from east to west. The food is very rich, and it's an amalgamation of lots of cultures within Asia, especially Southeast Asia. You have the Chinese culture, the Indian culture, Indonesians there, a few Malaysians there. So you really feel that. And because Singaporeans speak such good English, that's also a plus. I love hearing them talk Singlish. It's just a very unique mix of English and Singaporean accent. And I think 6 days is enough to see Singapore because it's very, very small. Although I could see myself living there, but for a very short time. The hawker centers, the food is so good, and I felt, although it's a great place to visit, I felt like I was in a bubble because there's so much wealth, and you see that. There's Maseratis, Bugattis, on the road, and I don't feel that I got to see like the urban poverty that you see in a lot of cities. So there are no slums, and the government makes sure to make sure that that's not seen. However, it does leave you feeling like you're kind of in an artificial world. But nonetheless, I felt very safe, and I felt that I wasn't in Asia really. But despite that, I had a wonderful time, and I would definitely say Singapore is a place to visit, especially if you're on a honeymoon or you're looking for a getaway destination. It's a long way from the east coast of the United States. The flight was so long, and it really knocked me off my feet for a day or two, but once you get used to the time zone difference, it's a very rewarding place to go to. So definitely add it to your list of places to visit in Southeast Asia.
This is a hawker center in Singapore, and this is during the lunch hour, so it's full with people in business attire, but you see these all over the city. They're like outdoor food courts with really cheap food, and this is me eating Indonesian food at one of the hawker centers, and it really reminded me of my Indonesian friends from Berlin. It's tempeh with tofu and a boiled egg and prawn crackers, all in a peanut sauce, and I was like just reminiscing about how tasty and rich Indonesian food can be. So these hawker centers are filled with food from Southeast Asian cuisine and must be tried. We're coming up to my friend Ben ordering Hong Kong cuisine, and he's ordering duck and pork, and I got the chicken and pork, but it was really tasty. Ben's traveled the world, so his culinary taste buds were awakened by this type of food, but it was really great to try something new. Bandung. I'm not referring to the Indonesian city, but it's this really great rose syrup drink with evaporated milk and ice cubes for Singapore's hot, humid days. We stumbled in Little India, where this practice rehearsal was going on, and the two Indian women organizing it asked for volunteers to come on stage. So I and a little girl went up there, and it was a really cool cultural experience, and something I'll always remember. I've been to plenty of Chinatowns or Japantowns or Koreatowns around the world, but I've never been to a Little India before, so this was a very memorable experience in Singapore, and I really just remember the smells of Little India and the incense burning and the herbs and the way that the food smelled was just a wonderful experience to get to know Little India through my nose. Yeah, so very memorable. I'd never been inside of a Hindu temple before, so this was also an experience to see all the shrines and all of the, I'm not even sure what the correct terminology, but the dolls, and seeing how another kind of faith works and how people respect their faith and worship and pray and offer sacrifices to idols, but it was a very touching experience to see and also to respect another faith that's quite different from my own, and this is one of the top experiences that I will take away from Singapore, is seeing a completely different religion and how it's practiced. Singapore is an interesting country. It's a bubble, really. And don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful place, but I felt like I was in Rodeo Drive mixed with Disney World, mixed with the Champs-Élysées. There's a lot of parts that are artificial, and you feel like you're on this island of artificial elements to it. But don't get me wrong, it's a country you must visit.
It's dynamic. It's really only been a country since 1965, and if you look at the history, whether it was invaded by the Sultans, the British, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Malaysians, it's never really had its own identity. But what's fascinating is all those different identities Singapore has turned into its own identity now. The fact that we have all these different immigrant communities that have created what Singapore is. You've got Chinatown, you've got Little India, you've got the strong colonial influence, and it's all created this very interesting, dynamic, sort of melded culture that's also very much at the forefront of development, whether that be environmental development, human development, social development, just development across the board, really. And it's hard to compete with that. And as a message to the rest of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, a region that's been sort of racked by start-stop growth over the decades, it's really an inspiring story.
Chinatown was really great, and I would argue that Singapore's Chinatown is the best one that I've ever been to. There's so many stalls and many streets. It just kind of kept going on, and rich colors of reds and yellows. And when I compare it to San Francisco or Washington, D.C. or New York, um, for me, Singapore had the best Chinatown I've been to. It was so hot on that day, probably over 100 Fahrenheit with humidity, but we braved through the heat. This is an experience. I'm trying not to look down. It's really high up.
With the Hard Rock sign, we'll say, when we see him next, we'll say.
Singapore was a very fun trip for me. It's a place I definitely want to go back to, and a place I could see myself living for maybe a year, 2 years max, because it's so small. It's one of 3 city-states in the world. It's the 20th smallest country in the world, and the 6th wealthiest, and that stems from that bubble effect that I felt. But definitely visit Singapore. It's worth seeing. The people are helpful, and you won't be surprised by what it has to offer. The food is great. It is very hot, so be very prepared for that. But definitely add this country to your list of places to visit in Southeast Asia.
And when you're free, take a walk around the building.